Good morning and welcome back to Gaming with ADHD, where today we are going to be talking with Griff Morgan about old school gaming and his documentary Secrets of Blackmoor, the true history of Dungeons and Dragons. Before we get into it though, do make sure we've got our social media links down below, still growing and trying to make sure that we use that. There are also links down below to the documentary. If you like what you see here, I absolutely recommend that you go check it out. It is fascinating, and especially to someone like me who didn't grow up with old school D&D, understanding the history where it came from is fascinating. So I highly recommend you check that out. But without further ado, let's bring on Griff and get started. Griff, I think we are lost in a dungeon somewhere. Or no, that's Griff. Hey, Griff, how you doing today, sir?
Product pitch.
Product pitch.
T-shirt. This is our new one. Chris and I dreamed this one up. We were trying to think of a T-shirt for the Lost Dungeons of Tonisborg, and we've been, it's like we've looked at the book a million times. It's like, let's make a T-shirt with just a map on it and just put old school on it. And so if you wear it around, nobody will, the only people who will know are people who are like, wait, that's a dungeon map. And it's like, yeah. And then they'll be like, well, what do you mean by old school? And it's like, oh, it's a really old dungeon. One of the first.
And not just a really old dungeon, but I mean, like I'm only in my mid 40s. But even I remember, the early days. Just you had the graph paper from science class, and,
right?
Yeah, no, we can totally do this. It's just like out of the old school books. So, yeah, fantastic. So, anyways, welcome to Gaming with ADHD, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm great. I heard, you're just waking up for your day just not long ago, and
yep,
and I'm just gonna wake up now because I got some more coffee. So,
well, fantastic.
I'm ready to go. Yeah, I got my little Neapolitan coffee pot in pieces here, which I need to pour into my milk and make myself a little bit of espresso here. But what do you want to know? I mean, I'm here to be interviewed. Whoop, that's not good. That one.
Yeah, let's not put coffee on the keyboard. That's not.
I guess it didn't fully steep. I thought it's supposed to drip through, but it didn't quite do that. Oh well, I have coffee everywhere here now. That's great.
Fantastic. Well, it'll make the room a little more aromatic.
Yeah.
So first question. I mean, everybody kind of knows, who I am a little bit because I've been doing videos here for a while. But who is Griff Morgan? Where'd you grow up? What did you?
Oh, I grew up all over the place. So I'm half Italian, and I'm half American. And so when I go to Italy, everybody's like, you're not one of us. And when I'm in America, it's sort of you're not really one of us either. So I'm kind of an alien wherever I go. And I don't know. I'm just like a nerd like the rest of you,
Okay.
And we're all kind of the same. I mean, when you watch the documentary, you see those people in the movie, you're like, oh, those look like my friends when they get older, they're going to be just like that, right?
Right. My uncle, my older brother, just a bunch of regular people. So
yeah. But
okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just like an old gamer at this point,
Okay.
I don't know what else. I guess I should be. You probably want me to say more, but I don't know what else to say. It's like I play miniatures, war games. I play computer games. I play RPGs. I'm just a gamer.
Okay, so so you said you're half Italian, half American, and so did you grow up part of the time in Italy or? Okay.
Yeah, I was in Verona as a kid. Verona's
probably
one of the most beautiful cities on the planet if you ever get to go there.
I have not been to Europe yet. I've spent a couple of years in Brazil for Mission for My Church.
Where?
Sao Paulo.
My cousins lived there a while.
Oh,
I have this like really international family. Like I've got cousins in like the Middle East and cousins all over Europe, and I'm here in the USA. So
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, I spent my time in Brazil and then had then got married young, and so our kids are getting older now, so
Okay.
we're now thinking it's like, oh, now we can go and do all those travel and all that kind of stuff. We're just trying to decide where to go.
Right.
But, obviously, so many choices. But okay, so you grew
Yeah.
up part of the time in Italy, and so when did you come back to the States, quote unquote, full time?
Probably like 1970 was when I moved back. I was about
Okay.
6, you know.
Okay.
And then we would go back and visit sometimes. And I mean, I was there a couple of years ago, hanging out with friends. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think. I mean, you said you saw the movie, right?
Yes, I've watched it 3 times.
Okay.
So
and you liked the movie?
I really, really did like the movie. And
thanks for that, because there are some people who didn't like the movie.
Okay, we'll get into that in a few minutes. So you're so 6 years old in 1970. D&D comes out
74.
74. Okay.
Yeah.
When did so how did you get into gaming? Yeah, was it something you always did as a kid, or?
That's a good question. It's kind of complicated. Like, as a kid, growing up in Italy, like one of the popular toys for kids, it was kind of a third world country, and so a lot of the things they were importing as far as just consumer goods, a lot of them were coming from out of the country. And so, like, our army men, we used those little tiny 1/72nd scale Airfix miniatures were really popular, little plastic ones. In fact, in the movie, you see the Civil War battle scenes, and those miniatures are Dave Arneson's collection of plastic Airfix that he used for his Civil War games. And I had a pack of those when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
And mostly I had World War II ones. And so that was kind of a big influence, maybe. I don't know. It's weird, when you're a kid growing up in Europe, you crawl around in castles and stuff and climb around in World War I trenches. And I remember once I went back to visit, and I was down by the river, and there was this thing sticking out of the bank of a big river in Gorizia, where it was the big front was there during World War I. And it was the Isonzo, which is the battles of the Isonzo, are like, historical facts that bad things happened there. And so I saw this green thing sticking out, and I'm hitting it with a stick, and I go over and I pull it out, and it was a World War I bullet. And
oh, wow.
Threw it over my shoulder in the water, and we went back the next day, and the water had receded, and I found it. And I actually, what's funny is I still have it somewhere around here. It might be like over my shoulder here, somewhere here. Oh yeah, this is the one right here. It's funny, I was talking about it, and I've got it right here, but yeah, there's my bullet I found from World War I when I was a kid.
Oh, wow.
My uncle had been in the Italian. He had been in the Italian, the Alpine troops, and so he had a lot of shells, and so he gave me. I can tell all these strange stories. Like, back in the 70s, my uncle gives me. I have that bullet. He cracks it open, takes the gunpowder out, so I can't hurt myself. And then he's got like something that's about, I don't know, just huge, like this big, and he opens that up. So he gives me all these bullets that he had as souvenirs from when he was in the military, with the gunpowder removed, which we flashed up. And I rode on an airplane overseas with a suitcase with bullets. Try to imagine doing that. Like, if you were to even put this vintage bullet into someone's luggage today, you would never make it. Like, they would have you somewhere, and they'd be like, checking you out.
You'd go in for the special screening.
Yeah, you get the special treatment. But anyway, yeah, I was always fascinated by things like that, knights and stuff like that. The knights that are in the movie are actually my childhood toys that I played with. And there was a company called Exin Castillos, a Spanish company, and they made castles that were like Legos, only molded with swirly sort of stone patterned plastic, and you could build castles. Like all the pieces were designed for castles, drawbridges and windows with bars and arrow slits and stuff. And I mean, if you look it up, it's really cool. So it's sort of like the predecessor to all the what's Stefan Picorni's stuff? I forgot what it's called.
Oh, the Dwarven Forge.
Yeah, it's like a precursor to Dwarven Forge, only it's Legos.
Oh, wow.
So I had that, and you know, I mean, I can think back, and playing with Army Men was just the thing for me as a kid. So I've told this story a lot, so I always wonder if like people are interested in hearing the same thing over and over and over. But around 1975, maybe, my friend Justin got me onto a computer system that he'd been messing around on called the Plato network, and I think it predates ARPANET, and it's a networked computer system with multiple terminals. And so we got on there, and it was right when they had started allowing game programming to be allowed. You know, before that, they would spot people doing game programs, and they'd like cancel their account and stuff, or at least slap their hand. But then they realized on the system that the sort of processing power required for these games was actually helping the system, because they could use it to test how well the system worked. And so they did this thing where they had a prime time where you're only allowed to use educational programs. And then on off hours, I think it was maybe after 9 or 10 at night, you could play games. And so as a teenager, I would sneak down there with my friend on weekends, and we'd stay there all night playing all kinds of early computer games. And one of the games was Dungeons and Dragons, letter D, letter N, letter D, D&D. And I mean, you can find YouTube videos of people playing D&D, samples of it. And so my first experience with D&D, which, I mean, Justin and I were already obsessed with Lord of the Rings, you know, so when we spotted D&D, it was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing. So yeah, that was my first experience, though. I wasn't with a paper D&D with dice or anything. It was through a computer interface. So it was kind of like a mixture between like David McGarry's Dungeon board game and D&D combined into a dungeon crawl sort of experience.
Okay.
In real time. And so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I went, you know, even then, my Mike Stasic, another guy I know from back then, he was in uni high in the hallway, and I went over there looking for Justin, and he was hunched over a milk crate with two other guys, and he was like, do you want to come over and play some D&D with us? And I was just like, I didn't even know what he was talking about, you know. And I was like, no, I'm going to go over to the computer center and play D&D. I don't know what you're doing over there, hunched over that milk crate, you three weirdos. And so it wasn't until about 77, the fall of 77, I moved away, and I discovered, actually, I have a set here, but I found it in a hobby store, you know, and so I found this, and one of these.
Oh, wow, that's a box I haven't seen.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, this is the basic set for original Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay. Oh, is that the blue book?
Yeah.
Version? Okay.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I mean, this one I don't think it has everything it originally came with, but it's got the rule book in here, which is just a wonderful
okay.
book.
Yeah, usually people just put that up on the screen, so I've been seeing that a bunch lately.
Yeah. I think in the movie, Pete Gaylord has a shirt with the color version on it in one of his interviews. And I have a lot of footage saved up of him we thought we were going to be doing a follow-up movie almost immediately. We figured gamers would be like, oh my God, a D&D history movie. Yay, let's watch it. And it didn't really take off the way we expected it to at all. But so yeah, we have a ton of footage still. But anyway, that's kind of how I got into it. I mean, once you do that, I think before I got that, there was what was it? Fantasy Games Unlimited had a thing called Citadel, and it was a bunch of maps on card, and you were supposed to play it with 25mm miniatures. So I bought Citadel, and I bought some miniatures, and I didn't have anybody to play it with because I didn't have any friends. So I just moved to the city I was in, so I didn't know anybody. I was just like this isolated nerd, you know. So yeah, that's
I can relate.
yeah, I mean I've always been kind of an isolated nerd, but I thought I was a lot more social than I was. Like it just dawned on me maybe 5 years ago that perhaps I am a weird isolated nerd introvert.
Yeah,
Like
it's actually kind of interesting that like for me it's been kind of the same thing. Like the first role playing game that I ever picked up was the Robotech role playing game from Palladium.
okay,
Um
yeah,
so and that was because they'd had the cartoon and I'm like, "Oh, what is this?" And I had no idea. I'd never heard of Dungeons and Dragons.
yeah,
Um and like at one point I did get invited over to another kid's house in 8th grade to, or maybe it was seventh or 8th grade, to actually play Dungeons and Dragons, and I think we made characters and that was about it. But for most of my life it's been buying role-playing game books but not necessarily playing. So I get what you mean about that whole isolated nerd where it's like I want to be involved,
right. But how do
but
I do that?
right, but sometimes it's like I'd like to be involved, but I think I'm just going to sit here in my house instead.
Right. Well, it didn't take long. Like once I got into gaming, I don't know. It's sort of strange. I ended up starting a D&D club, and so I didn't know any gamers really until I started that club. But once I started the club, I think we had a group of like 6 of us at least that would show up every Saturday to play.
Mhm.
And then I mean, I kind of hate to use the weird, these words like weirdos and outcasts and whatever, but there is a really specific thing to sort of the really hardcore gamer types that you run into, and once you learn how to spot each other, you kind of coalesce in these groups of people that are sort of out on doing these fringe things that other people don't do, or at least back then. Um, and so, like I met my friend Tracy Harms, who was, I think he had been exposed to, instead of D&D, he was somehow exposed to Empire of the Petal Throne. And maybe before I even met him. And, I found the game Ogre, and turns out Tracy was really into all the metagaming stuff and had been talking to Steve Jackson, writing him letters. And so it wasn't long after that Tracy started his, it was sort of a prototype campaign for Melee and Wizard using his own rules. And I still have pieces of that stuff from when he first was running his campaign. And so he combined that with Empire of the Petal Throne. And so for me, like the D&D phase, it went for maybe, I don't know, 2 years. And then or maybe a year and a half. And I was like, let's play this other thing in this really weird setting. And we went off into that tangent. But yeah, I don't know. You end up meeting a lot of people that you end up knowing for the rest of your life too,
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, even on like people on my Twitter account don't know that like some of my original gamer buddies are on there and I chat with them, you know. And yeah, so yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a typical sort of story. I think all people kind of have that. You see this thing, you're curious about it. Maybe you get it, maybe you don't. You find somebody who does it and you're like, oh, we should hang out.
Yeah, no, and I think even though it is a similar story, I think everyone kind of has their own unique take on it. Like
Yeah.
I so we've got Max from Legion of Myth in the chat.
Oh, hi, Max.
He says I played D&D first, but as a kid I went to Lutheran school and the Satanic Panic was real.
Oh, yeah.
Strangely, I was allowed to play Robotech, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and BattleTech.
Yeah, because
So
they don't have any Satanism in them.
right. So
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
but it is still one of those things where I
See,
think
when I was a kid, we were busy summoning real, actual demons, and so it was a really fringe hobby, and it involved a lot of sacrificing, and a lot of my friends disappeared forever. But yeah, it was kind of a different hobby back then.
that's fair.
Old school. Yeah.
But I think even though every gamer may have a similar trajectory. I think you still have a lot of nuance because number one, people are just they're people, so they're different. They have different experiences.
Yeah.
And like for me, I started with a role playing game, and then got into similar to Max. I got into BattleTech because big stompy robots.
Right.
And but then I've always kind of gone back and forth. I mean, that's part of the reason that my channel is Gaming with ADHD. I have so many interests in gaming that aren't just focused on one particular thing. So I think that's where it can be interesting just to see how people got to where they are. So
it's interesting too. I mean, even with the people in the movie, they all come together because they're into gaming, but they're all there to go to college, and then they all go off and do their careers. Some of them stay in the Twin Cities, some of them go off, some of them come back, but they keep in touch with each other. And there's people bring a lot to gaming from their life, and then later in life they kind of spin away from it, and then they come back to it. Usually after the kids are grown, you have more time to do stuff.
Right.
But like for myself, I have so many interests that, gaming is just one of them, I would say.
Yeah. So then let's kind of spin into that. So, obviously gamed through high school. And then was there ever any kind of a lull, or have you always been, playing a game of some kind?
Always at some point, and also, I mean, I am a first generation computer gamer, like there aren't that many people that can say like I was playing computer games in the 70s, networked computer games. And so as that technology got better, I mean, even before, I knew a lot of people that were into computing. And so there was always that connection for me. And as that got more popular, I was always sort of, I mean, that's just an horrible addiction anyway. And I've had to give it up. You won't get anything done in your life. So that and wargaming, I mean, I remember like Ogre was, we played Ogre or Ground Effect Vehicle or all the little micro games. We also played World War II war games. I mean, anything that was a good game, not necessarily even a good simulation. It was always that balance. Like there were the simulations that were too simulationist, maybe took too much time to really enjoy. But anything that was like sort of like a semi-quick playing war game was always up for grabs too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, absolutely. It's like you've got to find that balance between, okay, I'm here to have some fun, but like let's make it plausible. I mean, when you're a kid with your plastic green army men, it's like, oh, my guys, blow up your guys. It's like, well, how? You don't have any artillery or whatever.
BB guns, man. You get out your BB guns, and that's the equalizer. Can you shoot the opposing army?
Right, we did the illegal Mexican fireworks.
Yeah, that too. You got to blow up a lot of plastic models. Yeah, but I don't know where we're going with all this, but I mean, I think once you get into the whole, I mean, I think that there is a difference in the culture of gaming, and I always, I don't want to like get on here and slam people for how they game or what they game or whatever. Yeah. But I mean, there's sort of, I always call it the trifecta, like computer gaming, wargaming, and role-playing games. Like if you do all three of those, you're kind of a trifecta gamer, and that's what a lot of the old gamers were like when I first got into it. Even the Blackmoor bunch, they built a computer to help them with their Napoleonic battles back before, I mean, it's absurd, but they did it.
Oh yeah, I think you actually even showed that off in the film.
Yeah, Wesley still has it. It's really cool.
Yeah. So but back to you. So when did you decide to get into filmmaking?
Oh, well, that's another thing where my parents were really into watching movies. if you grow up in a, at least, well, my parents were kind of like crazy beatniks, and so they didn't, we didn't have babysitters, so they just take my sister and I to see whatever movie they wanted to go see. And so we were being taken to see all kinds of films in the 60s in Italy, from the mainstream stuff that we were getting from the United States to the sort of like the Italian, I don't know, what is it, the neo-realism or whatever, the 60s. And so I just grew up seeing a lot of movies, and I kind of grew up, I don't know, I mean, I think that my parents were very creative. My dad was a really good painter and a jazz drummer when he was a kid, but he ended up being a researcher, kind of broad spectrum sort of person. And so I think I grew up in that environment. And so the filmmaking was just kind of a natural thing. First time I picked up a film camera, I was just like, this is interesting, and I started shooting things and trying to do weird things with the lens and stuff and exploring it. And so I kind of taught myself how to do films with Super 8 movie cameras. And then there happened to be a woman who was teaching fine art video making, like sort of like video art classes. And so I was able to take the class, even though it was a graduate level class, as a non-regular student. I just took the video class and started making videos. And that got me really interested in video. So I kind of dropped filmmaking and went more into video making. But even that, there was a lot of elitism back then. It was like, oh, well, yeah, but you're doing something that doesn't look like, your medium looks different. Film is the true art. And I was like, you know what? It's, like, sure, an oil painting is different from a charcoal painting, but it's still very similar. And now everybody's using video, like we've come to the point where hardly anybody's using film. Good luck if you can afford to use it or even find it for, a small project. So yeah, so I was kind of self-taught, basically.
Okay. And so has that been your career up until now, or did you kind of jump around, or?
I worked in the engineering department of a PBS station for 12 years, and that was sort of self-taught too. I didn't really know engineering, but so I did it was kind of seat of the pants engineering for me. But I don't know. It just kind of like I came at it with an extreme curiosity about what, there's the sort of the art, like I can use these tools to make beautiful things and tell stories, but I also want to know what is going on electronically so that I can understand what I'm doing when I do the things,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, so I have a pretty strong, I mean, I wouldn't call myself an electrical engineer or anything like that, but I have a very strong understanding of what is going on within the video signal itself when I'm doing stuff with it, when I'm editing.
Okay.
Because editors really, I think people misunderstand what an editor does. Like a lot of people think, well, you're just cutting things together to do the story. And when you're making a movie, you're actually, as well, in the video side of it anyway, you're also your own engineer, and so you're engineering the video signal, and you're also sort of engineering the audio signal. If you're working on a feature film, it's a little different process because you really don't want to do any engineering work on the quality of the image. You're just assembling the cuts and putting in the transitions and matching up the audio to it. And then you send that off to a colorist, and the colorist takes care of all the exposures and color balance to make everything match up. Because like if you're, I don't know, it's you get a sensitive eye when you know about engineering work like that. Like I can look at a video on YouTube and I can be like, oh, that's 3/4. That was originally on 1/2-inch tape or 3/4-inch tape, or that was shot on film. That was shot on 8mm film. Oh, that looks like 35mm film. Like people who are like have a lot of exposure to that kind of stuff develop a real eye for those things. And even like to the point of like, your frames are flipping by at whatever your frame rate is, which with video it's what was it, 630 frames a second, but it's really two half frames. They did interlacing, but I could see an anomaly in a recording. I'd be like, wait a minute, back it up, and you'd frame by frame, and like there'd be like a little blip where some data had dropped out, and there's a little tiny flash, and it's like you get a very sensitive eye. You develop an eye for these sorts of things that most people don't have. And I can, watching Chris and I always talk about when we watch movies, like we see the flaws. Most people don't even notice the flaws, and we're like, oh my God, I can't believe that flaw was in that movie. Like and these are technical flaws, not, and just like weird little flaws, like, I still see, microphones dipping into the scene for like you'll see it happen once.
Right.
God, and it's like, why didn't they just remove that digitally now that they can? And things like that, or, like the reflection of the cameraman in the mirror across the room or something, who knows?
Right.
But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, you get, when you spend a lot of time doing that kind of stuff, like they call it painting. I used to set up the studio for the station I worked at, and you paint the cameras, which means you have to like, you look at scopes and you have all the cameras pointed at a chart and you align them. And now it's kind of done. It's very, a lot of it is very much where you just flip a switch and they do it themselves. But in those days, you used to have to use like registration charts or chip charts. And after doing that for years, I used to just be able to look at it and just, I would just look at them, be flipping between the images and just, turn the little tweaker on the adjustment, and I could just eyeball it within a couple degrees, on like within a half a degree on the scope, as far as like color, temperature, and stuff like that. And it's just something you get an ability, an aptitude with when you spend a lot of time with it.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So you've been in the industry for a while. So what?
I'm an outsider, kind of. But go on.
Well, I mean, I say in the industry as far as just
in the
like
business, yeah.
Yeah. But so as far as Secrets of Blackmoor, when did you get the idea that you wanted to do this movie?
Chris and I, well, I could go down all these avenues. Like how Chris and I met is a long story, and it's kind of funny, but it basically comes down to we were introduced 20 years, and then 20 years later, to 20 years before we actually met, we were introduced and we met and talked for a minute, and then 20 years later we ran into each other, and then about a month later I was like, wait a minute, you're the guy that did that magazine. And I put it all together in my head, and he was like, yeah, I used to do that arts magazine. And and so he had been doing movies with some friends, and his background, he was roommates with Trey Parker in college. And so, like, if you go see Cannibal the Musical, the director of photography is Chris. And he even directed and helped edit some of the scenes where they weren't really sure where to go and they were having to get things done. And he would provide, ideas, which is how, that's how filmmaking is. It's very synergistic like that. But, and you can see him in the film. He's the guy playing the triangle in the Triangle Solo.
Okay.
And actually, Chris taught Trey how to do animation, because Chris had been doing animations with stop motion since he was about 9 years old, using cutout pieces of paper. And so that South Park look is actually something that Chris invented. Little known fact. So yeah, Chris was making a movie with some friends. They needed an editor. They had sent it off and they were having trouble with the edit. And I basically just said, Chris, I'm the best editor, you should let me take a crack at it. And so I edited it. And you could debate whether my edit was the best edit, but I was the one who created the edit for the film so that they could get it into festivals, which they did. And then he was doing some other films with some other people, and I was kind of like the house editor for these things. And I just stumbled on I got back into gaming and just stumbled onto this. I mean, there was no plan to work on a D&D movie. I just met some guy on the internet, and this guy was feeding me information because I accidentally got into an argument on the internet about Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, which I didn't know. I didn't know there was any drama around that. I was like, well, yeah, their names are on it. They both did it. End of story, right?
Right.
And so when I got so much like pushback on Dave Arneson, I was like, well, that's weird. When people are very defensive about things, if there's nothing there, they'll be like, yeah, whatever, and they'll ignore it. But if you have a lot of rage and pushback and people being mean to you on the internet over something, you're like, ooh, I found a soft spot.
I've pushed a button.
Yeah, I pushed a button. I'm like pressing on that little bruise you got the other day, and you're like, ah. So I was on the internet. Kevin was feeding me articles, and I was posting them. It was like, ah. And I mean, people, I was arguing with Jim Ward and John Peterson and all these people that are like really known in that community, and I was a total outsider to that. So finally, I mean, I just thought it was funny, and but then I was like, okay, this is really weird because I'm like the proxy for this in this war. I'm like the proxy army for some guy he's like, no, I can't get in there. They all know who I am and they'll trash me and whatever. And I was like, well, who are you? And Kevin was like, oh, I used to be Dave Arneson's webmaster. I was friends with Dave. And so, I don't know, it just was an accident. We started this little group on Facebook called Circle Blackmoor. And it was this secret group of about 4 of us talking about Blackmoor stuff because we were all fans.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Raphael and Havard from the Blackmoor Forum. And Kevin and myself. And then finally one day Kevin revealed like, oh, Dave Arneson was trying to do a documentary. I was like, what? And so I guess there was all this footage. I mean, I know it now. At the time I was like, oh, I guess there's all this footage out there. Well, I'm a filmmaker, And so I mean, for 6 months I was just diving deep with these guys that knew everything about Blackmoor, way beyond what I know, And so I got sort of like a college crash course on Blackmoor from Havard and Raphael and Kevin. And I would go hang out with Chris, and we would hang out, and I started just telling him all this stuff, and I was like, Chris, this almost seems like it could be an idea for a movie. And he was like, let's just go up to the Twin Cities and shoot a bunch of interviews and see what we get. And I mean, it is an accident, I mean, it's funny because I see, all these other groups that they would do the whole, like they go to Kickstarter, they get all this money, they're posting. I always see the Hubris game where they post, we're doing the thing,
Mm-hmm.
And that's very like the YouTube influencer sort of thing. And we did the opposite. We hid out for about 3 years after we started. And the only people who really knew we were working on the movie were the people that were in the movie or people who had refused to be in the movie because they didn't want to be in it. They were like Gary Gygax fans. They didn't want to be in a movie about Dave Arneson. And they all thought that these other movies that they were backing to the tune of like, I think one was up to like maybe $500,000.
Oh, wow.
We're going to happen. So along come Chris and Griff, who are self-funding their project. They're doing it totally seat of your pants. We don't have fancy gear. We're using Blackmagic cinema cameras, which are good cameras, but the other crews are using red cams, and they're using like $100,000 cameras where we're using like $5,000 cameras. And so we just worked on it, and I don't know. And then as we were working on it, we watched the other crews sort of implode and get into lawsuits and all this stuff. And I think I know these people, and I think that it's unfortunate because once you go public, there's a lot of expectation, and you have your own expectations of what you think this will do for you. This will make me popular. This will make me rich. This will make me rich and popular.
Right.
Whereas Chris was like, maybe we'll make our money back. And I was like, I hope so, because this is costing a lot of money and we're going into that
I'd like
big
to
time.
eat.
Yeah, I mean, if I, I mean, since the beginning of the movie, I have lived below the poverty line. And so it's been, what did we start in 2012 or something like that? So, I'm going on 11 years of living below the poverty line. I am not some famous movie director by any means. I'm pretty humble about it all. But yeah, I mean, it's just idiotic, all of it. And I would like to tell you some really romantic story that we knew exactly what we were doing and we're geniuses. And it's just like, we shot a bunch of interviews and then we had to figure out what the story was. And it took like 6.5 years to make the movie. Um, you know,
Well, but the thing is, I like you say, well, you wanted this romantic story that we knew what we were doing. But in
yeah,
the end, I think those romantic stories are where you just have an idea. It's like, okay, there is a story here.
right.
There, I sort of knew the controversy between Gygax and Arneson, um, but just barely. Yeah, it was all
Right.
like Gygax was always the name associated with Dungeons and Dragons, at least to me.
Yeah.
Um, and so I mean, it's like I always talk about how, especially with gaming, it always does come down to the story, whether it's a board game, a card game, whatever. There is some kind of a story there that you are telling,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
to be able to identify, okay, there is a story here, so let's go see if there's more to it. What can we find out? Is it just what we already know, or is there more to it? And so I think the more romantic
Well,
side is going on that adventure to find the more.
right. Yeah. I mean, and now we're good friends with all the Blackmoor bunch people. And I mean, we live far away from them, so we can't game with them all the time, but they're our buddies and we go up and visit them when we can. We haven't in a while because the whole COVID thing just blew everything,
Right.
it destroyed our movie as far as sales because of the various reasons. So we were just kind of like, okay, we're not even making any money anymore. And we can't go on trips to go visit our friends and do any gaming. But um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's the whole thing. Is it's a process of discovery. Like I'm interested in films, even narrative films. There are kind of two styles. Like the Hollywood style is that you do the script. You got your writers. You really work your script. You know exactly what you're going to do. You go into the edit. For the most part, you don't really change that much in the edit as far as storyline and whatever. Then there are filmmakers who are very exploratory, even when they're making a narrative film, and they sort of have a loose outline, but then they're going to discover the movie as the movie is made, and they're going to discover the movie as they edit it. And so that's kind of the process I'm much more interested in, which is why I don't watch any Hollywood films, because they are generally about discovery within the process. And like, I don't get anything as a filmmaker watching a Hollywood film because it's just a really locked down. We're making a product and it's going to do these things. And so, yeah, I mean, the project, I mean, I had a lot of experience because I was like, I spent 8 years as a kid. I was a PBS kid, watching PBS documentaries. I'm a nerd, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm reading histories. And then professionally, I was working in the control room during prime time for about 8 years. And so I'd be there at night alone watching all the Nova series and all the nature series and all the mystery shows. And so I kind of picked up kind of the style. I think I inferred a lot about the style. And I have some education in anthropology, and so I was kind of using a lot of my knowledge about anthropology as far as how to go about making the film.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's funny because I just today found somebody reviewed the movie on YouTube, and I didn't know the review existed. Excuse me, I'm like juggling my coffee maker that's in pieces here. And
No worries.
and this reviewer he didn't even really review the movie. He just went off about how he thought it was so biased and terrible and horrible. And I was like, oh God, yeah, the Nova theme. Oh my God. I mean, that's in my, I every night at work, multiple times, because I'd be watching it. I would take the feed first and then I'd air it. So I'd like check the feed on the tape and I'd hear the Nova theme, and then I'd air it. I'd hear the Nova theme. But yeah, so this kid was just going off about like what a terrible movie. I mean, I was just kind of laughing as I watched the review, and I was like, God, he has no idea how much work went into like vetting all of this. Like we've got a crew of like our official list of, I forgot what's in the credits. We've got like 7 or 8 people listed as just research consultants, And so anytime we made, like, I would write the script. I had a rough script at first. I would show the guys these rough scenes, and the script was just text. You wouldn't even hear my voice. But I'd be like, okay, at this part, I'm saying this about this thing. Is this true or not?
Right.
And so they'd be like, well, they would come back and they'd correct me, or they'd say like, yes, this is good, or you could do more. And so yeah, so it's just like, there's the research side. I mean, it's sort of like when you're doing research, you're in a very inductive process. You're just gathering as much stuff as you can, and then when you're doing the edit, you're in a deductive process where you're trying to deduce exactly what the things are, and you're trying to narrow things down and cut away all the chaff. And so yeah, I was just like, whoa, this kid watched the movie and didn't understand a thing he saw, either that or I've failed as a filmmaker, because you cannot understand what I'm saying in the movie. But most people seem to understand it. You understood it, I don't know.
Yeah, to me it's interesting because it's this group of people, like what I actually thought was very interesting the first time that I watched it. So I don't even remember how I found it. I honestly don't. But I was told that it was this story about Dave Arneson, and I knew Dave Arneson was one of the big names behind early Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm like, okay, I'll watch this for this history about Dave Arneson. And you do touch on some of his history, but to me, I thought it was very interesting because it was so much more than Dave Arneson. Yeah, like this whole, for lack of a better way to put it, just this cast of characters that like they were all friends, they were all there, they went different ways in life, but all the story turned out to be more about this group of friends as opposed to, oh, here's the story of Dave Arneson from the time he was a kid until he passed in 2009.
Right.
So how'd you even find these people? That's one thing I want to know.
Well, Kevin had, I don't think I even have it in any of my files because I had a couple computer crashes since I started working on the movie. Maybe Kevin has it. He had a Excel file that was Dave Arneson's personal phone list. And so I had some of those numbers may not be active, but I had a list of pretty much everybody in the game industry from the early days, and then all of his friends. And so all I had to do was call a couple people. I think the first person I called was Wesley, and I was quaking in my shoes because I'm not, I'm talking to the guy that people have told me may be the guy that invented role playing. And I'm, and now I tease him, like, because we're just buddies, and that's what buddies do, is they tease each other.
Right.
But I love him dearly. And so, I think I started with Wesley. I just started calling people, and I tried reaching out to people like in Gary's group, and they were all like, oh, they'd been kind of taught this mythology about Gary Gygax being a genius, and Gary pulled D&D. I don't know. I can't say where he pulled it from, but he pulled it from there. I mean, I can, but it just seemed like it was pretty clear there was a much deeper story there. And then just things started coming out. I mean, even with like the guys, we got in, I don't know, maybe third or fourth day of shooting. We went out to shoot David McGarry's interview. And that was the one where it really broke the ice. Before that, we were just doing interviews and we'd leave. But with McGarry, it was sort of an amazing interview, and I wish I had more of it. But the location we had to do his interview in died, and so we had to leave before we were done. We probably could have gone on another 2 hours,
Mm-hmm.
And but it was that, I mean, I've told this story a lot, but it's like I'm winding cables, doing my little over under on the audio cables, and Chris is down the hall putting the camera away, and I'm shouting down the, and McGarry's sitting at the table kind of like, well, that's weird, we just got like, and so I just shout to Chris, I'm like, Chris, where are we going to have dinner? I need some scotch. and I look at McGarry, and McGarry's like, you're going to go somewhere and have something to eat and have some scotch, And it was such a role reversal in a way, because we're like there with the, it's David McGarry, creator of Dungeon board game. And then, but we get done, and David's just like, can I hang out with you guys? You seem kind of cool. And we were like, yeah, we're going to go. Are you okay with scotch? And he's like, yeah. And so we were like, well, there's this place next to this cigar joint that we found that we like to go to. And he was like, I live just a few blocks from there. I was like, oh. So he met us, and then we, we just talked about, it was just that when you meet people that you connect with and you're going to be friends, but like everybody's had this, you meet somebody and you just know you're going to be friends for the rest of your lives, because you get together and it's like you're talking to somebody in your family or something that you've known forever. And both Chris and I think David McGarry says the same thing. It's just like, yeah, these guys are my people, And so we were like, well, where else can we get? We were kind of started doing a little, we would just pop from place to place and have a little scotch. And, we weren't getting loaded at all. We were walking from place to place and talking, having a good time. So we're at a place like, I don't know, half a mile away that we've walked to, and I get a call, and it's Leslie, and he's like, Griff, have you seen David McGarry? And I'm like, yeah, he's right here drinking scotch with me. And Leslie's like, you are? Or yeah, he's right here. We're drinking scotch. You are. And we'll never forget that. And it's like, yeah. He's like, well, like,
can I come?
Can I come? Yeah. I don't think he even got a chance to do that. I was just like, you want to come down? So he came down, and then we ended up, we sipped beverages like adults the whole night and had a wonderful time. And then after that, it was just like, we're all friends, And so I would say maybe the thing with the movie was I tried to keep from being like, when I was working on the movie, it's like I had to separate myself from that. Like, these are people I love a lot and I care about, but I need to make this movie consistent within itself.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's it. I don't think any documentary filmmaker can get around that, because once you start talking to people, you make friends with them. And that's something I was never taught. And I've never heard any other documentary filmmakers talk about that aspect of making a documentary, that whatever you're doing, you become friends with these people and you care about them. And
yeah, well, I think anytime you have a situation where you sit down and you try to get to know someone, that's one reason. I remember when we were setting up the interview, I mentioned, okay, I like to get to know the person, talk a little bit about their background, and you're like, I'm not so keen on that whole background stuff.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm just a really private person. I'm an introvert, and yeah.
No, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. It was more about the point of, if you can get to know somebody.
Right, you get a rapport.
Yeah, even if you have differences, like a good friend of mine who I disagree with on so many things, but I know who he is as a person, that it's like, okay, I have to put those differences aside, because I know who he is. So
yeah. I had the same thing. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's that sort of connection. I'm interrupting you, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I understand what you're saying, you know. But yeah, back to the whole movie thing. I mean, even the whole thing of us getting it done, like I see all those other crews and like all these people that invested in those other movies and stuff, and all I can say is that the project is daunting as far as trying to do a story on Dungeons and Dragons. The whole thing is just daunting. It's such a huge history, and it depends on where you want to pick it up and where you want to end. Um, and we've got interviews. I mean, we would do interviews where we're just trying to feel around and get a feeling for what somebody's like, um, or just background information of like there's a whole gap. I still have a whole gap of I don't know really what Dave Arneson was doing between kind of the end of adventure games, and then like there's a 5-year gap in there where he goes off to work with what was his name, Tadashi Ehara, and he's working in San Francisco with him, and for a few years, and he's also hanging out with the Flying Buffalo crew over there in Arizona a little bit. I think they're in Arizona,
my neck of the woods.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And so I don't really know a lot about that. So we have like interviews with people where they don't appear in the movie because it didn't relate to the story, and a lot of it is kind of like trying to get to know Dave Arneson as a person. I don't know. They're an astounding group of people. I don't know where I was going with that, but I guess I was just trying to say, like, I understand where the other film crews, because they had certain expectations of it being a really easy project, or maybe they had expectations of what the core thesis of the project would be that were different between the crew members. There were these implosions in those groups, and that's really unfortunate because I think, I mean, we all love role playing, and we all just, they all want to just, I mean, in the end, they just wanted to make a good movie about role playing games. But if you go at it from sort of, I know how to make movies and I'm just going to make a movie like a Hollywood movie, you will probably fail. The only way to do it is to invest a lot of time and to do a lot of research and to really understand the subject. And yeah, I mean, it's a big project. It will consume your life, But I'm not surprised that other movies were not able to do it because we had to cut off a piece of it,
Yeah, well, you make an interesting point about the other film crews, and I honestly, I this is the first I've heard about other film crews trying to do something similar.
Yeah.
But there's an interesting kind of side discussion going on in chat. We've got Cal Vanoni who says, I think he meant to say McGarry, and Dave made up, so that's good enough. Maybe not for some, but they're both gone now.
Yeah.
And then Max chimes in saying, I'm from Minnesota, so I think I'm required to be pro Arneson.
I wonder where he is in Minnesota.
He's actually in Alabama now.
Okay.
But he said that he grew up there.
Oh, yeah.
But
don't you know?
Yeah.
I can't do it right. My girlfriend is from that part of the world, and she's always, it's sort of like the rain in Spain, only in Minnesota you say the beer's in the back of the boat. I can't say it right. But it's like sort of the training to become capable with Minnesotan. You got to like be able to say the beer's in the back of the boat.
Apparently he was born and raised in Stillwater, Minnesota. But it's interesting where this kind of conversation is going about how, apparently the lights are on.
No, my camera, I have a cheap crap camera, and sometimes it does that. I think it's because I waved my arm and it changed the lighting on something, and it just went, whoop, I'm going to compensate.
That's perfectly fine.
Maybe I'll like.
That's fine. It'll balance out. It's YouTube. It doesn't have to be perfect. But basically, there's kind of this argument of, well, you have to pick a side, and I think that kind of does a disservice to both sides, because you do have individuals coming in, And while we know more of the story about Gary Gygax because he did run TSR for quite a long time, and we don't know much about Dave Arneson, I don't think it necessarily means that you have to say, oh, well, this is the good side and this is the bad side. And my suspicion would be a lot of those other teams maybe went in thinking it has to be one way. And then when they get other information, that's when it starts to fall apart.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, there was there was the original Dragons in the Basement, which Arneson was working on. I actually have a hard drive with all the footage, but I don't have any rights to use it. I tried to get rights and couldn't negotiate them. And there's the D&D, the documentary. I mean, that's the funny thing too. We started our documentary and we thought we were the only people making a documentary. Within a week of, doing our thing, I find out that there's all these other people doing movies. So there was D&D, the documentary, that split into two, and there was The Great Kingdom. And then after that, you got Pat Kilbane's movie. And so, there's all these movies out. And then the footage from D&D, the documentary, has now been purchased or leased, by that other one, the new movie that's supposed to be being done by, what the hell is his name? It's got an Italian last name. I can't remember it though. He's an actor. He's an actor.
Manganiello or something?
Yeah, Manganiello. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and even that crew, like they announced that they were doing their thing, and they showed who their crew was, and I was like, well, you're going to be busy for a while. Like, I mean, the shooting the interviews is not, the work. The real work comes into understanding what your interviews are, and writing narration and such, and that's not being mean either, because I would love for somebody like their crew seems like they have more money than we do. So if they start promoting a D&D documentary all over the place, people will be like, D&D documentary, and they'll be like, oh, there's another one here too, and it'll just like, we'll just get on their coattails and ride all of their marketing to making some money off of our movie too. So I'm totally for it, but I don't think they're going to have anything for at least 3 years, unless they can speed up the process. Either that, or they're going to create something really fluffy, and it won't be like really deep, like a deep dive research film like ours is.
It'll be a Wikipedia page.
Kind of, and I'd rather see them do something that's like a solid piece of work. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, we'll see what happens. How are we doing on time, by the way?
We've still got about an hour. You are
Right.
You're perfectly able to talk all you want. So but yeah, so it's
Oh, Jesus Christ.
I think
maybe my light here. I'm gonna just do this. Here, I'll just do this. Like really mysterious guest.
It's the campfire effect.
Lightning effects. Yeah, I do wish I didn't have so much light on me all of a sudden. I don't have a good light over here, so I have this like fluorescent tube that I just throw on my desk when I do interviews. Anyway, you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
No, it's I name my Thursday night live stream topics and tangents for a reason. It's totally fine if you interrupt me. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
So you've got this crew about. So how much time did you spend collecting all of the interviews that you did?
Well, I mean, this is where like Chris is amazing, because Chris didn't bail out. And as a producer for a film, when you have a director who's going like, I mean, we call ourselves co-directors, and we really are in a lot of ways. But when you have a partner that's saying like, I got some stuff, but I need more interviews. Let's go shoot again. Okay, let's go shoot again. So we spent the whole time, I think we stopped shooting maybe 6 months before we got the last edit in. And so we were going out there at least once a year for about 4 or 5 years to do interviews. And so So I don't know. Does that answer your question? Sort of. I mean, I didn't. It was. Here's what happens with a research documentary: is you do interviews, and you think if you're new and you're a total noob like I was, I'd never done a research documentary. You go home thinking, I'm going to watch the footage, I'm going to figure out what the story is, I'm going to edit it together, we got a movie. Yay! So I was telling Chris, like, he'd be like, how much time do you think it'll take? I'd be like, oh, about a year and a half will be done. Well, we're 2 years in, and I'm like, oh, it's going to be at least another year. So when I like, Chris is amazing just because he didn't go like, you know what, Griff, we're not going to do this movie because you're an idiot, Griff. and yeah, I mean that's why, like, when I talk about the other crews and some of the problems they had, I'm like, I don't know how our crew stuck together so long, because there was really no reason for Chris to not just be like, this is stupid, we're wasting money, this isn't going anywhere, we don't have a movie, it's been 5 years, you're an idiot. And then somehow we got a movie. Yay. And then during that time, I was writing a book with Dan Boggs too, which is another stupid thing. I'm like, how am I writing a feature film and writing a book? I don't know. Because I'm like really ADHD, but somehow it all fit in under the same umbrella, so I could do it. That's that ADHD thing where if it seems like it's within the same environment, you can handle big things, but once they get separated, everything goes to pieces. But my hyper focus was like, I can do this.
Sure.
But so yeah, I don't know. We got all this footage. We did interviews after we finished the movie too.
Okay.
And we're going to try to keep doing interviews. It's just been impossible with the whole COVID thing. It was kind of impossible. Additionally, I mean, I don't want to go down the whole, people argue about the dangers of COVID, but you've got to understand that everybody that was in the film is at least 70 years old. And if you look at the statistics for COVID, at least in Colorado, something like, 90% of the people who passed away from it were 65 or older. It was impacting the older community heavily. And so we weren't going to be flying around visiting people and bringing disease to their homes and killing them.
Yeah, and it especially for a documentary like this. I totally get that. Like, I'm one of those where, at least for me, I'm in my 40s, so I'd rather just go and live my life. But my parents are in their 80s, and so it's like, okay, yeah, let's be a little bit more careful. I totally understand that. But also for a documentary like this, I mean, sure, you could do a Zoom interview or something, but it's not going to have that same look. It's not even going to have that same feel.
Yeah, I don't really like the Zoom interview. I don't know. I mean, it's amazing that we got the interviews. I think a lot of people who see the movie, because there's no information coming with it, we lost so many people that were in the movie. Like Dwayne passed away since then. Peter Gaylord was kind of like I hope nobody minds me saying that from his family. He was ill, okay, and he had an illness that was affecting his consciousness, and which I think is that wasn't what killed him, but I'm sure it impacted his health heavily. So those two were like, Dwayne had a stroke a few years before he passed away. So we lost those two the year before we started the movie. Dan Nicholson passed away. I think it was cancer. So I was never able to interview Dan Nicholson, which is really sad. I mean, I'm really close with his I think his son is really wonderful. I talked to him at times. I wish I could spend more time. Like, he came through town on his vacation and I hung out with him,
Sure.
We're like, it's weird when you become part of the Blackmoor bunch. They are tight. Like, people I know that get ill or somebody dies or something happens, I'll hear about it through the grapevine. But anything happens in the Blackmoor bunch, and it's like the teletypes are clattering away all over Minnesota and all over the United States. Like, oh, so and so, is in the hospital. So and so had a heart attack. So and so had, this happened. And generally speaking, I think I'm like in the top 5 people that gets the call first now. Um, um, and so, yeah, and then we lost Gaylord. We lost John Arneson. Dave Arneson's father passed away a few years ago. And I just feel really privileged to have been able to know John as briefly as I knew him. I really liked him a lot. I mean, his persona was the persona from an older generation, and it was like he had a good sense of humor and was also a very serious, very capable person. And then,
Well,
so we got. Go ahead.
Let me interrupt real quick because you bring up John Arneson. Rewatching the movie the other day, I thought that was actually a really interesting portion to add to the film because it, like, being a father myself, like, sometimes dads just don't get their sons. It's like,
Yeah.
why are you doing this? Why are you into this? This doesn't make any sense.
But I remember my dad. I mean, my dad describing he was like, even like a little bit before he passed away, I would have game sessions at our house, and he was like, I didn't know you were capable of that. Like, I came in and you were like 16 and you've got this table full of people and half of them are older than you. A lot, like they're in their 20s and you're in charge of the whole thing, And he was like, and I had no idea what you were doing, but he was just like, it was amazing to him, But anyway, I'm interrupting you, but
no, exactly. I mean, my dad's into cars and hot rods, and
right.
I'm not.
Right.
But I
you
mean,
should be.
Well, I mean, I am a little bit because he's my dad, but it's like I'm not to the degree that he is. But my point about John Arneson was, so you have this dad, and like one of the things he talks about, he's like, yeah, it was like all of these guys coming over, and I had no idea what they were arguing about in the basement, but you could still see that love of a father that my son's doing something weird that I don't understand, but I know he's making something. I know that there's something coming out of this. And I think that was a fantastic piece to add to the film. So
yeah, we got so much interview footage with John. I mean, we spent an afternoon with him, and I mean, it was like sort of a family gathering because Belia was there and his grandson is there, and Wesley's there. Like these are all people that have been in his life, and we're at the place where it was like an elderly care type place, and shooting in the lobby in like I don't know, just not really a lobby,
a lounge room, kind of area.
Yeah, like a hangout room. And so yeah, I mean, he talked about a lot of things about Dave that, I mean, that was the hard thing with the movie. I wanted to put everything in, but it's already over 2 hours long. If I put everything in, my first edit I showed to Chris, I think was 6 hours long.
Oh, jeez.
And Chris was like, this doesn't even make sense. Like, what are you doing here? And it was a really rough cut. And yeah, it was just a nightmare. And so I have all this stuff with John talking about Dave Arneson and Dave's life that is really insightful about, Dave growing up and what he was like as a kid. And he talks about his relationship with his mother, and he talks about Dave's mother, which I think is also really interesting. I mean, John describes his wife as being incredibly capable, and just that she was in a generation where women weren't necessarily allowed to fulfill their goals in the same way. And so I think Dave gets a lot from his mother too. You see a lot in his dad. That, I mean, when I sat down, I think I have it on videotape. I just looked at John and I was like, "You look, your son looks, you guys look alike." Like and the first then he says, "I feel sorry for the guy." And I don't think I put that in the movie. I think I saved that for, the next movie. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's the other thing is, like, I just really expected when I was a kid in gaming, like if you leaked something, well, there was a lot more media. It was less corporate, and so if somebody was doing something cool, somebody would write an article about it, or it would get out. Like once something, I don't know, some game company or it's just some nobodies made a game, and like TSR, the Dragon magazine was like the hub for a lot of that. And if not the Dragon, you had the Space Gamer, or you had Justice Guild Journal, or Different Worlds. But there were these magazines that had a huge distribution pre-internet, and so if somebody did something cool, they would do an article on it if they heard about it, because they were just gamers. They weren't corporate people who were trying to keep you from buying other people's product and keep you focused on their product, which is how things work now. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of had these hopes that maybe like there would be like a grassroots support sort of thing, and it just never really happened. It's just like, the 5e players are absolutely not interested in these old smelly people like me or people in the movie. So yeah, I don't know. We never got to do the follow-up movie. I haven't looked at the footage in years. I just why?
Well, I mean, I know that I kind of poke the bear a little bit online whenever you
you've been great. I mean, see, the people who have seen it, our fans are great. Like the people I know that I see on the internet talking, but it doesn't really get outside of that, and that's part of the way that social media is designed. There are like search bubble mechanisms in there that keep people within search bubbles,
right?
So things don't ever escape little clusters. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Just it's kind of interesting because nobody's really shown any interest at all, on a big scale. And so that's why I'm going on shows like yours.
Yeah,
people like you. I mean, maybe you don't have 10,000 fans, but you've got fans who are more likely to be like, "Oh, this is cool. I like this."
Yeah, and I think, to me, I mean, it's a story. It's a story that should be told. Looking at role-playing games, and whether you're a Gygax fan or an Arneson fan, or you came to it, some other route, like understanding the history, like you mentioned, like the 5e players and the younger generation, like I think I mentioned Gary Gygax to my 17-year-old. Now my 17-year-old's the bigger role player in the family.
Right.
And I mentioned Gygax to him, and he just had this look of, what are you talking about? Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because the review I saw earlier today, the guy went on for like 5 minutes about how I made some big comment about he was sort of implying that I was trying to rub salt into the old wounds of conflict between Gygax and Arneson, which is something I actually avoided in the movie. And his big bone of contention was that something about me, he couldn't understand the comment about when I talk about in the film that both Gary's name and Dave's names have now been removed from the game.
Yeah.
And that's a really significant, I mean, I've talked about this to other people, who made Monopoly, who invented Risk, who invented Parcheesi, who invented, I mean, these were a game designer designed and built these things. And nobody knows who they are, and their names have been removed. And it's not even about the money, it's just about crediting something. I mean, what if the Mona Lisa didn't have a signature on it and nobody knew who made it, or if it had been intentionally removed so that nobody would ever know who made it,
Right.
And that's what the corporations do with games. Like, don't kid yourself. They don't want you to know they don't want the muddy waters of potentially complex human beings being associated with the history of the game. They just want it to come out of nowhere, and you get to play it and buy it.
Oh,
you get to buy it. They don't care if you play it. But
I don't remember where I saw it, but somebody made a point about Games Workshop, how like you don't know who the sculptor is anymore on any of their models. It all comes from the Games Workshop design team.
Yeah, that sounds like really like, oh, we're so like we all like each other and we just share, and it's like, no, these people maybe should get credit, for what they do.
Well, I
I
mean,
don't know. I mean,
as an artist, how do you build your portfolio if you can't say,
I'm the
like,
guy
oh
that
yeah,
did that.
that's right. Well, it just
Yeah,
says design team. How do I know that it's actually you?
yeah, yeah. Well,
And
and I've met artists that worked for Wizards of the Coast and did like. There's a a woman here in Denver, who did artwork for the those cards, and also
Magic
maybe for
Magic the
yeah, for
Gathering.
Magic. She did some. I think she did some cards for Magic, and she did some art for maybe it was third edition or something like that. But nobody knows who she is. She's not allowed to. It's like you have to draw it in this style so that it matches all the other art, and you don't put your name on it. And here's your check. Goodbye.
Right.
Um, and so, I mean, that's something that was in our interview with David McGarry. It's something. I mean, I talk about the foot. I know the footage inside out, and this is, hundreds of hours of footage. But there was one interview with McGarry where I specifically asked him about that issue, and he was like, "Oh no, during that time period, we wanted our names on our games, you know."
Mm-hmm.
And so, even his game, they will not put his his agreement is that his name has to be in the game somewhere. So they put his name, I think, inside the rules somewhere, like based on the glimmering of an idea by David McGarry, but not really his game anymore because we bought the rights from TSR. Um,
Right.
um,
Fine print below the copyright text.
yeah, and then they sort of ruined it by making the board too small to hold the cards on the rooms and stuff. Like they went cheap, That's the other thing, they go cheap, Make
Right.
Hasbro and WotC just make garbage. I hate those people.
No strong feelings here.
Oh no,
Uh,
my good friend Kyle. Um,
yeah.
yeah. Um, but part of that was because they, here we go. We're making a documentary. Well, gee, maybe Wizards of the Coast could be like, hey, these people made a documentary about D&D. That's kind of cool. We'll just put a little blurb on our website about it, like,
Or maybe
but
social media tweets it out or
I
something.
know they've watched it, I know that they've watched it because they're not going to watch it because it's about their product. And if they haven't watched it, then they really are idiots. So, but either way, they don't want to have any association with our product because it doesn't look Hollywood enough for them, And it doesn't follow, like if you go on their website, their website is the history on their website is actually factually incorrect in a lot of places. So that's another thing. But yeah, I don't like Hasbro. Anyway, we can go on.
All right. Well, then let's do this. So uh so for anyone watching, if you have not seen Secrets of Blackmoor, there is a link down in the description. And I highly recommend that you do watch it because I do want to switch a little bit off of the documentary. But I do want everyone to see it. I literally, anytime Griff mentions this on Twitter, I make sure to retweet it. I don't necessarily spam my timeline with it, but there is a link down below. Go watch the movie. Griff prefers that you use Vimeo. He gets a little bit better cut off of that, but it is also available on Amazon.
I mean, I had people who would always ask, they love the movie, and they were like, "How can I support you?" And we don't have a Patreon, but I believe in our website there's a little, like you can throw us a couple bucks on our website, just like $5 donation or whatever to help our project or whatever. Not that I expect millions of dollars there, but anything helps at this point.
I mean, if as long as we get enough that we can see part 2. When I got to the end of the movie and it said part 2 coming soon, I was like, oh no.
Well, we really thought part 2 was coming soon too. We were like, yeah, this is great. We feel like we've done a decent thing, and people will like it. No, it's like, I don't know.
Well, actually, real quick, I think we'll like one last thing about the documentary. You said that there's been some controversy about it. What is that controversy? Because I mean, I've only ever Like I watched it and then I threw it out to a bunch of friends saying, "Hey, you should check this out." But I haven't heard much about it.
Oh, I'm trying to think what the controversy would be. I mean, there's a lot of controversy. You know, gamers are gamers, and they're a bunch of fat nerds and skinny nerds and
Nerds.
a lot of pasty white guys for the most part. And so I think that it caused a lot of ruckus because we were kind of going against the grain within the historical community of telling a story that was different. So I mean, that's the thing is like. I think about it often. I mean, I already have a story in my head for the next movie. I know what it's going to be. I've got a launch point, and that's really all I need is an entry when I work on a movie. Like once I can get an entry into it, I can work off of that. It takes me a long time to get to that point. But I even like all that footage. It was so sad to see those other documentaries not succeed. And, none of those people are talking to me. I'm like, come, call me. Show me your draft. Ask me what I think. Like, I'd be glad to just help you. I want to see another movie come out that I didn't make and just see other stuff too,
Right. Maybe there's somebody that you didn't get to talk to or that you weren't aware of in the story.
Yeah. I mean, I would actually love to do a documentary now about Gary Gygax. I feel like I've gotten to know him really well. Like, when you
make that episode 3, the bridge from Artisan to Gygax.
Well, and everybody thought we were slamming Gygax, and I put this like beautiful ominous music right before Gary comes on, before we mentioned Gary, and it was my homage to Gary. Like, you're the guy that said save or die. I'm not going to put happy cartoon music before I talk about you. I'm going to get the ominous music out.
Sure.
And then when you see him when he comes on screen, it turns into this beautiful tinkly music. But all these people thought it was like that was the other thing. I saw this review today, and I was like, he's obsessed with the fact that I'm like so biased and totally slamming Gygax, and I'm like, I didn't say anything about Gygax hardly at all because I just talked about what Dave Arneson had done, But yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that. It was just like I would love to do a documentary about Gary Gygax. I just don't have the funds or the time, and
sure.
I'm older now. Like it would take me, I literally like if I do this next movie and, I don't, when you see people talk about movie directors, they talk about how many movies they did in their life. And I've got, at my age, I might have 2 or 3 more movies and then I'm kicking the bucket. So right. I got to think about what I want to make, not to be morbid or anything, but it's just the reality of it all. Where were you wanting to go with all of this? Anyway?
Okay.
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Well, no. That's I warned you that, we'd kind of just go where the conversation took us, but right. We're about 90 minutes in and I wanted to make sure that we also talked about Lost Dungeons of Tonisburg.
Oh yeah.
So
that was just kind of another accidental thing, we discovered it while making the movie. I showed the t-shirt at the beginning. I don't know where I threw it, but the maps are these really, they were Xeroxes of the originals. It had been thought lost for forever.
So real quick, what is Tonisburg?
Tonisburg is Vestfold in Blackmoor.
Okay.
It is the city of Vestfold, and it's a dungeon that exists on an island in the river across from just next to Vestfold. But when Arneson, that's the thing people don't realize is that Arneson was the only dungeon master in the world. Within 2 years of being the only dungeon master and having to come up with ideas, he was running games all week long. Like there were people that were calling him on the phone to play. Like he just never got a break. They literally burned him out. So when he got draft copies of the game, he was just like, yay. You guys go play. I got other stuff to do, Like I've got to actually write these rules so I can send them to Gary and Gary can put it together with the other rules. And so he gave out playtest copies to some of his gamers, and one of them was Greg Svensson. And Greg, he also sat down with Greg and explained the rule, how he he taught Greg this system that was probably just in his head. Yeah, you should be really glad you did. It's a really nice book.
I just like this, that he's like, I don't know why I backed it, but I did.
You should. No, it's. Oh, have you seen? I mean, oh, these are the. We need to start making these again. These are our dice bags.
Oh wow, that's a nice big dice bag.
They're really nice. They're like fuzzy and whatever. I got all this stuff piled up. I don't know if he backed it on the paperback level or the hardback level.
I just did the paperback level because that's what I could afford at the time.
Okay. Well, this is what it's going to look like. Or no, if you got the good paperback, this is the $30 one. The $60 one is, I don't have a sample of it yet. They've been
I think I just did the $30 one.
Okay. It's a nice book. You know, it's just not as, you know, it's just.
That's fine.
It's just the difference between 50-pound paper and like
remember
70-pound or archival paper. You know.
Remember, I started with Palladium. I'm used to that format of book.
No, I meant the guy that our guest in the chat. What did they get?
Oh, what did they? He didn't say. So
okay. Anyway, so we found this dungeon and it took us. I mean, McGarry thought that it might be Tonisborg, which had been. There's a story to that. I'm not going to go into the story. I'm going to leave it as a surprise.
Find it in the book.
David McGarry accidentally lost the dungeon, and I think it's mentioned. I'm pretty sure it's mentioned in First Fantasy Campaign, and so and Greg talked about it, and Arneson would have talked about it, and McGarry would have talked about it over the years, and so it came to be known as the Lost Dungeons of Tonisborg. And because it was lost for 35 years. I think it was lost like maybe around 82 or something like that.
Okay.
Which is still like really early in D&D history. I mean, we're talking 74 to 82 or maybe 79, somewhere in there. Oh, yeah. So the other one, see, this is the one, we do these nice books. And it's because I saw Pathfinder books that my friends had. And they exploded. They had a tendency to explode. And so we do these really groovy looking books that look like this. And they have a fabric cover. And it's hardbound. And it's archival paper. And it comes with like a nice color. It's funny because this camera makes it look blue, but it's really, or this light. It's this light. It's actually very purpley. You can't see it really.
Kind of royal.
Yeah, and it's got the nice purple ribbon here to mark your place. And so anyway, yeah, so if you backed at that level, I mean, seriously, it's a nice book. It's going to last a long time. Unlike like your Paizo books that explode, and I've heard that a lot of the D&D 5e books just explode. Somebody I know backed some Kickstarter for like $100 and got a book that they said it lasted about 3 weeks and the pages were flying out. And this I've had for a while. And watch, I'll be on camera and it'll fall apart. But it's not, it's not gonna, there's nothing, it's good. But anyway, yeah, so we just found that and we had, I mean, the person who sort of verified it all was Dan Boggs. And Boggs and I have been talking about wanting to write a book. And I told him I wanted to do a book that was kind of like, I look in all the RPG books and there aren't very many books that are well written that also talk about how to be a dungeon master. And so this is kind of like, I mean, in my estimation, is probably the best book on how to be a dungeon master for an RPG. And there are people out there who have bought it, and I'm hearing that they're saying like, yeah, the section on how to be a DM is just like, that's the good stuff. But we also have like some history about the dungeon. Greg talks about it. And then we published the, let me see if I can find them. Boop, boop, boop. They're in here. There's like just examples of the original maps with some text, kind of supporting text. It's like kind of, I mean, it's like a fantastic like coffee.
Oh, wow.
Book. Yeah. So Arneson, go ahead.
I was going to say, so how much did you like to make this book? How much did you have to go off of? Did you just have the dungeon maps or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then McGarry didn't find, there was one piece that got separated. And this was kind of this is the sort of stuff when you're a game historian that just blows your mind. But like this, there's this page here, which is two-sided. There's this side and then the other side. And and this page, what's astounding about it is that there are a couple things that are really the astounding thing is the scholar's crown and the soldier's crown and the cleric's crown. There are these crowns in here, and they're like these artifacts, and they're mentioned in D&D. I'm pretty sure they're mentioned in the first edition 3 booklets. The crown, they're described as the crown, like the crown and the scepter and maybe I forgot. I'd have to look it up. They're like a set of 3, and one's for the fighter, the fighter, the cleric, and the wizard. And then I think it also reappears maybe in Eldritch Wizardry. It might also be in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. But it was something that we're not really sure if that was created in the Twin Cities. I mean, the first of it we see is in this. So maybe this thing that Greg has created was talked about between Arneson and Gary put it in. It's just mentioned in D&D as like an artifact that you could make. What's also interesting about it is that it does. It has a rule. There are all these like weird plug-in rules that they do for D&D, and it's how DMs used to run it. And so there's like the Scholar's Crown. It says deduct 12 from intelligence and get less than this number to wear it, right? And so maybe on a D20. So like if you got an 18 intelligence and you deduct 12, you're gonna have those are your odds, right? And then there's a little chart up here on the original one, which we changed it for the book, and we had a lot of debate between us. I wanted to make it a little bit more stiff and old school and hard to do. Dan and McGarry wanted it to be a little bit easier, and Greg did too. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll just use this. So I love killing PCs. It's like, look, I found the crown. But yeah, like if you're 1 to 5 over, you get an electric shock, and the crown returns to the pedestal. 6 to 8 over, you're unconscious 1 to 6 hours, and if you fail a saving throw versus spells, 11 or higher, or no, 6 to 8, 9 to 10, you go into a coma if you fail a saving throw versus spells.
Oh, wow.
If you get 11 or higher, it's instant death. Okay. So what, 6 plus 11? Yeah, if you roll, a 17 or higher on a D20 when you're trying to do this thing with all your mods and whatever, you're done, and it's on the 10th level of the dungeon. By the time you get down there, you're a high level character. In old school D&D, you might have invested 3 years of your life doing this, and you're just done on a die roll. Haul the body out. But it's an interesting, it's an early example of D&D mechanics, and it's an early element that appears within D&D that might have been just created by Greg as a teenager. Because Greg might have been maybe 18 or something like that when D&D was published. Mm-hmm. He's one of the younger guys. And so, yeah, it's just, the whole dungeon is pretty astounding from that perspective. And then the other perspective is if you look at the maps, there are so many connecting stairwells because it's randomly generated with dice that you could turn the whole dungeon sideways and it would just look like a dungeon sideways too, because there's just all these connections going all over the place. And which is kind of an interesting idea. What if you designed a dungeon sideways or vertically? And I don't know. But what else is really interesting about the dungeon? The doors. He draws the doors the same way that Arneson did, as the pinball machine paddle.
Okay.
So you know which way the door opens. There are like lava shafts that come up and down through like 4 of the deeper levels. There are vertical shafts up and down through the dungeon. There's one that goes from level 1 all the way down to level 10. It's so convoluted that players will eagerly take a stairwell, and they won't realize that this stairwell has just taken them from level 1 to level 6. And
at which point they're dead.
well, there's a lot of screaming and running away.
Hey, brave Sir Robin ran away.
That's new D&D is nerfed to hell, and people don't learn how to play well because they just get to win all the time. Old D&D was extremely brutal, and there was sort of an art to playing. You had to be a good, cautious player, and it taught you a lot. And you'd use tactics and stuff, like, I don't know, like if the monster's big, there's a bunch of monsters, but they're big. You step back in a doorway, and only one of them can fight you through the doorway. So like your odds are better. You got 3 attacks on 1 or whatever. Little things like that. Or you go up a stairwell and only, they're limited by the size of the stairwell, but you've got a whole circle of people whacking on their heads as they come up. Tactics. It's really useful in a role-playing game.
Almost like the game evolved out of wargaming.
It's weird, huh? Yeah. And so, I don't know. We had those maps. I mean, that's all we had. We talked to Greg about it. He couldn't really remember everything about it. I mean, he hadn't seen it for years, and he drew it when he was just a teenager. Mm-hmm. And Greg is really more of a war gamer. Even in the movie, I think he talks about loving the Napoleonic campaign. Like, given a choice, he'd rather play Napoleonics.
I remember hearing that part.
Yeah. I'm the same way. Like I've kind of worn out role-playing games, and I'll play with people and I enjoy it, but on a certain level, I'm just like, man, if we just get out 1,000 miniatures, that's my thing. But what else is interesting about it? I don't know. We just wanted to. I mean, it was very synergistic the way it happened. Dan and I just started writing, and we only know each other through the internet and a couple phone calls, and we just started jamming on it basically, and just come up with ideas. And like one of us would think of a header and write some, and the other one would write some more. And so you kind of have both our voices. It kind of flip-flops between our voices in there. But I don't know of any really good D&D books that actually teach you how to be a dungeon master and teach you the old techniques. So,
well, I mean, there are still technically the old books. My understanding, you can get at least print on demand versions of the old, basic and advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Maybe Appendix N has a lot of stuff in it.
Wasn't Appendix N mostly like the novels and whatnot that inspired it? Again, this is me not having
I think it was
researched that much.
A section where Gary kind of talks about a lot of different things having to do with the game. It's just kind of like covers a broad spectrum of ideas for how to handle a game. I mean, I think the basic set, the Holmes Blue book is an incredible book, and there is a copy out on the internet. If you just search like Dungeons and Dragons, Holmes, HOLMES, basic set, D&D basic set, Holmes, PDF, it'll be like the first thing that comes up, and you can get a copy and read it. It has typos. I think it's from an earlier edition, so it's full of typos in some places. Or it's not really typos; it's like jumbled stuff.
Sure.
But you get the majority of the information out of it. You can print it out, and Hasbro, WotC aren't going to republish that because I don't think that they have the rights to it, because Holmes wrote it, and he probably had a really good agreement that allowed him to claim a lot of ownership of that particular manuscript. And
maybe that would be another documentary, or at least
yeah. I mean, there's just so much stuff in the history of these games. You're not going to get it in one movie. There's just no way. If you want the history of Dungeons and Dragons, it's probably like, I don't know, 5 2-hour movies, and even then, it might not cover it all.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, it's interesting because, especially especially now. I mean, it at least at the time it was a complete, at least, and again in my head it was a completely new form of entertainment. You know, like having a set of rules to make up these fantastic stories. Um and I think being able to like, at least now, still being able to talk to some of these people about,
Yeah.
you know, how they got involved, why they decide, like, you know, I watched an interview with I want to say it was Mike Miller, the guy that the guy that created Traveler. You
Mark,
know, yeah,
really nice
right.
guy. I really like Mark a lot.
And so, you know, the fact that, or one thing I appreciate about what you're doing, or what you have done with Secrets of Blackmoor, is you're at least capturing some of this information that, you know, like, I think we talked one time. To me, the Secrets of Blackmoor seemed to be more about a story about Dave Wesley. I think I'm
It's just hard to talk about Dave Arneson without talking about David Wesley. They were really close friends, you know. I mean, David Wesley and Ross Maker too. Like David and Ross were there, you know, an hour before Dave Arneson passed away. They talked to him before he died, you know.
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, when I talk about these people being tight, I don't know. I mean, I think most people wish they had a group of friends like this. Um, and I would say that about Gary too, because I mean, the parallels, like when we were talking about Dave Arneson's family and how, I mean, you see, if you see photographs of Dave with his family, you see that there is a big connection there with his family.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see photographs. We have some photographs of, I think it might be Dave's birthday party, and all the Blackmoor bunch are there, or a bunch of them are there, you know, and you see a real closeness in that group. I don't see that with Gary. I'm told that his family did not approve of him. He was sort of an outcast in his family. Um, Oddly enough, my friend, there are only about 30 families of Gygaxes or something like that in Chicago at that time, or maybe 15. And my grandparents were good friends with the Gygax family. And so, in a strange way, my family might be connected. It might be possible they knew the Gygaxes in Chicago that Gary comes from. But anyway, and so Gary's, you know, Gary's really a different person because he's like not, he doesn't have the support of his family, you know, and I think, I don't know. I mean, you can really look into them. You know, you don't want to read too much, but I think that things like that have an impact on people, you know. And so I'm very sympathetic toward Gary in a lot of ways. Like, I think you have to step back and look at things from multiple perspectives, or look at it from the perspective of the person who did whatever they did, and understand that from their perspective, they are doing the proper thing. And the whole war between Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax is like irrelevant because the two of them made up at the end. You know, Gygax went to Dave Arneson's house and had dinner with Dave Arneson and his family and his daughter, and he said, you know, I want you to come back to TSR and do some modules. And Dave was like, okay, let's do this, you know. And that was something that I think it was Rob Kuntz talked about. You know, he was like, if they hated each other, why were they, you know, why would Dave bother going back? Why would Gary talk to Dave? And why would Dave agree, you know?
Right.
And so, I mean, I think you know, when all is said and done, it doesn't matter who did the most. They did it together. They created Dungeons and Dragons together. Dave couldn't have done it alone. Gary couldn't have done it alone. And so, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's really important to honor both of them for the genius that they had, because there is something synergistic in the original rule set. I've gone through the original rule set and read it cover to cover recently, and I mean, now that I'm starting to really understand game design better from a, you know, it's like computer programming on paper. There is so much in there that is just like really profound. And I think one of the most profound things is that they were really hands off and didn't overrule it. And if you play in the old way, like that basic home set that you can find online, or you play the set that Arneson and Gygax created together. You're playing within a really interesting sort of what I like to call the informal game. You know, it's you have formalized game rules in there, but the whole basis of it is this make believe, and they really like push the rules to the side and focus on the experience that you have when you get immersed in the game. You know, so when you're dungeon master, when you're playing the old way, you're not looking at your character sheet to solve problems. It's like the dungeon master just says, you know, you go down a stairwell, and as you go down, there's like little tendrils of some sort of weird algal type plant thing, and you get down to the bottom, and it's really dark, but you've got a torch, but it's kind of sputtering, and all the light is, you know, your shadows are dancing against the walls, and there's a door in front of you, and the door is, it seems like it's very solidly built out of like oak or something like that, and it's reinforced with bronze fittings, and and it looks like it's locked. There's a keyhole there, you know. So what do you want to do? You know, I mean, you've created this very cinematic experience for your players, and you can take a table full of people like that and put them in this place. And so when I see a lot of people playing, like a lot of times, especially when they use like computer interfaces and stuff like that, it's like, yeah, you're moving pieces on the board. This is not D&D.
Right.
Neither Gary nor Dave used miniatures when they played games, unless it was a giant combat. They didn't use miniatures.
Well, yeah, and I mean, as like another thing to kind of consider, if I can put my thoughts back together, like, so you have a dungeon master describing something. So, like you said, there's an oak door with a handle on it,
Yeah.
okay, and a lock.
Yeah.
Well, how I'm going to interpret that lock? Well, okay, I'm interpreting it as, you know, tarnished steel, you know, very black and dark in color. But maybe, you know, even you as the dungeon master, maybe you're envisioning it as, you know, polished brass and shiny, even though it's down in this dungeon, but maybe you forgot to add that part in. And
Right.
so,
but then we create the exchange of information. You want more details, right?
Right. Whereas if you're playing with miniatures or with a pre-made map, yeah, it's like, oh, well, it's the like there it is. That's what it looks like.
It's a standard door, you know, door thing.
Right.
Okay. I used the door rule. I rolled a d6. I rolled my d20 or whatever, or my stat is this or whatever. Yeah. It breaks you out of that experience of really being in the place. I don't know. I mean, there's an art form to being a dungeon master, and that's part of also why we wrote the Lost Dungeons of Tonisport, was like these techniques are, we're not inventing them, we're preserving them. And
right.
At the same time, it's a very, I mean, there is stuff in the Lost Dungeons of Tonisport which is new stuff, and maybe some newer approaches for dealing with situations, and so it's a very flexible system that is always growing. It's like it's so dependent upon what is happening in the moment, but at the same time, the referee and the players are coming up with ideas in the moment, and so it's a very alive thing. There's nothing concretized in it. It's alive. It's just generating itself. You know, that's what the play format is. Like I see people talk about I forgot what it was. It was like they try to say that it's like the emergent narrative, and I'm like, no. This is a narrative. Like the minute you start playing, you are in it. There's no emergence. You are in a narrative state. You are in a story state, and you are experiencing it. But yeah, I could go on and on about this stuff. I get really deep and philosophical about it.
Well, Max, who actually had to leave a little bit ago, but he actually brought that up earlier about the emergent narrative.
Don't call it the emergent narrative, though. It's just like
well, he called it emergent storytelling, which is why I love RPGs, because the ending is unknown. The journey, so to speak, is greater than the destination.
But the condition, you know, it's really important to be aware that you are in a condition that is a narrative condition the entire time you are playing. A story, I mean, the story is there the minute you say, I mean, the second you describe something, like, what do we see? Well, there's a hole in the ground and there's stairs leading down. That's story right there. You know, what do you want to do, right? And I think that that's the other thing that I think I've been writing a lot about that. And it's kind of going to go into my next book, but the idea of story that a lot of people, because when I got back into gaming and started talking to people about role-playing games, I saw a lot of people talking about story and narrative, and like, well, 5e is all about story and narrative, and and role-playing, and like they think the play acting is the role-playing, and it's like, no. Everything you do in the game is role-playing. When your game master describes what the door looks like, that is role-playing within the terms of what role-playing means in an RPG, and and everything is, I don't know, the idea of like, I mean, it is just a narrative condition. The minute you play an RPG, you're in a narrative condition, and so this idea of like, I think a lot of people don't understand what the RPG is. I mean, they can play it, but they can't understand what they're doing or explain what they're doing, and so when they talk about story, they often don't even know what they're talking about when they talk about story, because story is something that could be very, very defined, or they define it differently. And my idea of story is not. They're more talking about plot, and that's different.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, story can just be setting. Like I could describe I'm not going to do it because I'm not going to eat up 5 minutes describing something to you. But, I can describe like just the ambience of a situation without telling you where you are, and that is story as well, because it puts you in that place.
Yeah. And I think that like Max is probably trying to talk more about just the fact that the ending is unknown.
Right.
We have our story at the moment. This is
I guess that's where I was going with that. It was the idea, like I hear these people talk about story, and like because 5e is designed around these modules that are sort of like a ring through your nose, and you're just like the little piggy being led through the story. That
right.
People think that that's story, but a real RPG story is completely open-ended. And so what the game referee's responsibility is not to create little plot points that they lead the players through like a movie script, because that's not an RPG, that's railroading. The game master's responsibility is to create the possibility. Okay. And so like you open a door, like, yes, we come to the end of, we come down the stairs, we see the door, somehow we get through the door. Okay. You've got a room, and there's like an open, like there's, I don't know, an open hole in the ground in the middle of the room. What do you want to do? Okay, well, now it's up to them to decide what they're going to do to interact. Or maybe there's a statue there. What do you want to do? Let's leave it alone. Let's search the walls, but don't go near the statue. We're going to go somewhere else. But you've created possibility, or we want to examine the statue. You've created possibility by introducing these elements, whether they're red herrings or real things that the players need to be interacting with. And so, yeah, I think that that's a really important aspect of the role-playing game. That I think a lot of people like to use this term sandbox as the style.
Mm-hmm.
But what the referee is doing is just creating, sort of writing half the story and leaving the rest up to the players to create.
Right.
Anyway, I'm getting all serious, and this is the way this is how I get when I argue with like other historians, game historians. When we get together, it's really like, I've got my thesis together, and I'm going to hammer on you for a while. And that's perfect. Me for a while, and then we scream at each other, and then we go get a drink.
Well, no, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, I think like if it literally wasn't for the lack of time, I would absolutely love to dive down some of those rabbit holes.
Yeah.
But it is 9 o'clock, so or it's 9 o'clock for me. Yeah. So
I hope we got enough covered.
I think we left a lot uncovered. So it was absolutely fascinating. I wish I'd done a little bit better in asking some of the questions, but regardless,
I always feel that way when I do an interview. You're driving away in the car, everything's, and it's like,
Why didn't I ask this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so like I said, we will say our proper goodbyes
Okay.
off stream.
Yeah.
But is there anything that or give the elevator pitch about why anybody watching should go watch Secrets of Blackmoor?
Well, I think that Secrets of Blackmoor will give you a lot of input on how you game. I mean, if you see the history of how the game evolved, it's going to make you think, and it's going to improve how you play, whether you're a player or a game master, because there's even the stuff that isn't about specifically about fantasy role playing should probably open your eyes a lot to how you approach your own games. So I would say it's kind of like, yeah, you get to learn the history of games, but you also get like this deep dive into like becoming a scholar about role-playing games and being able to redesign how you do your own games. So yeah, that's kind of my pitch, you know.
No, I think that's a great pitch.
I mean, that's what I hear from people who have seen it. They're like, it's changed how I play RPGs, you know. And when I hear people say that, I'm like, that's great. You know, you listen to the original players tell you how, like, give you weird ideas, and you're springboarding off of that. You know,
yeah.
Keeping and it's the RPG concept, the methodologies are constantly growing, and so you're keeping the tradition going by just going off into your own little space and doing it. You know. So.
No, and that's that. You know, I hadn't even thought about that aspect, but I think that is a fantastic point. So, just to remind everyone, it is linked down in the description. Amazon, Vimeo. Again, Griff likes Vimeo. He gets a little better cut. And
tell your friends. You know.
Tell your friends. Share it with everyone. You know, find a way to send them a copy.
Yeah.
You know, but honestly, I literally cannot recommend this documentary enough. I absolutely loved it. I'm so grateful for Griff for coming on tonight and chatting with us. You're very, very welcome. But also, don't forget, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new here. But other than that, Griff and I are going to go say goodbye, and we will talk to you all next time.